If you were with us last Sunday, you remember that our theme was the Sabbath, the day of rest. And I shared a term that our Jewish brothers and sisters use for the Sabbath, which translates to meaning joyful uselessness. That's what the Sabbath is all about. It's a day to do absolutely nothing, and to do it joyfully. Well, after church on Sunday, I learned from Mark Zancanero's mother, Pauline. If you remember, it was her birthday. Was she, Mark? 93? 96. Well, Mark's 96-year-old mother said after church on Sunday that she remembered growing up with an Italian phrase which was very similar. And that phrase is nulla intenzionale. And what it translates to is purposeful nothingness. I really like that phrase, and I like that concept that we are to do absolutely nothing on purpose, and to do it with great joy. That's what the Sabbath is about. Now, as a boy, I grew up with another Italian word that fits today's gospel reading, and that word was abbondanza. Have you heard abbondanza? Abbondanza means abundance. And I would hear this on Sundays when we would have our family gatherings. My father owned an Italian deli in Queens, New York. And the 5 members of our family, we lived in a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment above the deli. And on Sundays, we would invite aunts and uncles and cousins to come to our apartment, and there we'd all be in that little apartment, and everybody would bring food, and there was always a feast. And my grandmother would say, abbondanza, abundance, eat, eat. There was plenty for everybody, and there was always food left over that people brought back home with them. That's what Jesus is demonstrating in today's gospel. You see, the apostles come to him and they're panicked. There are all these people. How are we going to feed them all? They're all hungry. What are we going to do? And Jesus demonstrates there's enough for everybody, and there were leftovers too. I said at the beginning of the service, Jesus is here to teach us spiritual principles. And he said everything that he did, we could do. Which means that we can do what Jesus did. We can take the little we have been given, and we can increase it and multiply it. Now, many people ask me, with all of Jesus' miracles, they say, Pastor Sal, did this really happen? Did Jesus really take 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish and feed 5,000 people? How is that possible? Well, you could take this story literally, or you could take it symbolically or metaphysically. We know Jesus often taught in parables. I mentioned to you before that 7 is a very spiritual number, probably the most spiritual number, and it stands for spiritual completion, that God created the world in 7 days, and so the creative process is 7. So we have the 5 loaves and the 2 fish is 7. And maybe this story isn't saying that Jesus physically fed all those people, but that his teachings nourished them and fed them spiritually. Now, whether you take this story as literal or symbolic, it doesn't matter, because it both teaches the same truth. And the truth that it teaches is that you have the power within you to take what you do have and increase it and live lives of prosperity and abundance. Jesus said, I have come so that you may have life and have it abundantly. That's God's plan for us, to live abundantly. And Jesus came to remind us that he wasn't the only Son of God. He said, you are sons and daughters of God. We're sons and daughters of royalty. And people who are royal live in kingdoms. And Jesus said, that royal kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, is within you. When you live in that kingdom, you experience lives of prosperity and abundance. But as we know, many people have forgotten that they're sons and daughters of God. They've forgotten to live in that kingdom. And they live in another place. They live in a city, and the name of that city is called Scare. Scare City. Scare City is scarcity. They don't live in a place of abundance, they live in a place of scarcity. And when you live in Scare City, you live in the city of fear and worry and anxiety. You live the way the apostles lived in this story. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? There's never going to be enough. How are we going to do this? How are we going to have enough? That's Scare City. Jesus didn't go to Scare City. Jesus went to the kingdom that was within him. That's where our power is. If you notice in this week's epistle, I shared a quote from Wayne Dyer in which he said, abundance is not something we acquire. Abundance is something we tune into. And that's what Jesus did. He tuned into that power within him, and it's in you too, to increase. It wasn't coming from a place of fear and worry. It was coming from a place of power. In the words of integration this morning that Kathy read for us, Eric Butterworth said that abundance is not a condition, it's a consciousness. It's the way we live and the way that we think. So you get to choose. Everybody in this room, you get to choose whether you're going to live abundance consciousness or you're going to live scarcity consciousness. And you know, it doesn't really have to do with money. I know people who have a lot of money who live with an abundance consciousness, but I also know people with a lot of money who live with a scarcity consciousness. They're always worried about, are they going to have enough? Are they going to keep enough? Are they going to get enough? And then I know people who have very little money who live from scarcity consciousness, but I also know people with very little money who live from abundance consciousness. They're always so full of joy. They're always so grateful for what they have. They'll give you the shirt off their back because they know that there's enough for everybody. That's the difference between living abundantly and living in scarcity, where you feel like there's not enough. I got to make sure I get mine because there's not enough for everybody. And Jesus is saying there is enough for everyone. And that's what I want to demonstrate to you. And that's what he does in this gospel. He did it actually in his very, very first miracle. If you remember, the first miracle that Jesus does in the Gospels is the wedding feast at Cana. And it was the same thing. People in scarcity, they were, Jesus, what are we going to do? We ran out of wine. Oh my God, this is a disaster. And Jesus takes water and he turns it into wine. Again, he manifests abundance where everybody else is looking at lack. He's looking at abundance. And if he did it, we could do it too. Many people today are very critical of what's called prosperity theology, or sometimes it's referred to as the prosperity gospel. We see this in the popularity of mega church pastors. And if you see them on TV, they're preaching to thousands of people, and they sell millions of copies of their books. The prosperity theology is that God wants people of faith to be rich. Now, I want to let you know that there is truth to that. Jesus did teach a prosperity gospel, but he wasn't talking about money. It can involve money, but Jesus didn't say that. What Jesus is teaching is that prosperity, like we heard in the words of integration, literally means to go forward hopefully. It's that consciousness of, I trust in God as the source of my supply. I move forward in life with great hope. I don't move forward in life in worry and fear and anxiety. I move forward with hope. And that's what prosperity means. So Jesus does want us to prosper. That's why he came, so that we would live life abundantly. So when you are walking around worried about, are you going to have enough? You're not living the abundant life that Jesus came and died for. So, we know that people who acknowledge their good all the time are people who have abundant lives. It is why, if you notice in this gospel, what does Jesus do to increase the loaves and the fish? All he does is take it, and the gospel tells us he gave thanks for it. He gave thanks for what he did have. He wasn't focusing on what wasn't there. He was giving thanks for what was there. In the epistle, I had a quote from Eckhart Tolle, and he said, acknowledging the good that you do have is the foundation for all abundance. If you want an abundant life, start focusing on all of the good things you do have and express your gratitude for them. That's the power that activates the abundance. You may have heard this term. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. It's cause and effect. So if you're a scarcity person and you say, I'm never going to have enough money for retirement, then guess what? You won't have enough money for retirement. If you're a person who says, no one's going to hire me at my age, then no one will hire you. That's how it works. And that's what Jesus is demonstrating. If you say there's not enough, then there won't be enough. But if you're grateful for what you have, then the effect is you get more things to be grateful for. That's how it works. It is a spiritual principle. It is real. And you can apply it in your own life. So what I'm telling you today is all of us need to stop living in scarcity. We need to start remembering the truth. And the truth is what we heard in the words of integration, that we can be affluent. And affluent isn't just about money. Affluent means in the flow. When you put yourself in the flow of life, when you stop struggling and trying to swim, the other way, when you just go with the flow of life and be grateful for what you are given, then you're leading a life of affluence. That's what it means. So let's make a kind of decision this week, because remember, God gave us free will. We get to choose. The outer circumstances in your life should not control you. You control them. As we heard this morning, it's an inside-out process. If you want a life of prosperity and abundance and affluence, it starts with you and your consciousness and your thoughts about it, and you're being grateful for what you have. So let's affirm this week that God is the source of our supply, that all of our needs are met on time and in full. That is the truth. We always have enough to share and to spare.